Hello, my keyboard enjoyers. It's been a while since our last in-depth review, and today we will be looking at the Augur 60%, which is visible here in a very nice eggplant purple. Now, this is the Augur from Jeff from JLabs, and it is a 60%. It will be run as an in-stock product actually soon, so there will be a link in the description, for about $278. Ships in a hard case. It's got a 6-degree angle, about a 19 millimeter effective front height, comes in black, this lovely purple, and e-white, and it's available in both wing-key and wing-keyless. The version that I have here is the wing-key version, and it will come with a half plate and a full plate. The build I've got here is on a full plate, and unfortunately only supports ANSI layout. So yeah, it's a very interesting board, and those of you that know me well know that I'm not a big enjoyer of 60%, but I actually really like this, and we'll get into why. I mean, you can probably guess, but we'll get into why. Anyway, we'll roll the intro, and we'll start off with the unboxing experience. Alrighty, let's get this leaks out of the way. Here we are. This is the Augur. Now, first things first, this is a pre-production prototype sent to me by Jeff, the maker of this keyboard. This is his personal unit sent to me for review. I did a couple builds on it till I found a build that I thoroughly enjoyed, and will be sending it back to him. So yeah. So this comes in a hard case. Now, again, considering this is pre-production and not the actual production version, yours will probably have some stuff inside. But the board comes in here in this lovely Canon key style case. If you've seen one, you probably know, you can probably identify it. There we go. It's got the JLabs branding. It's quite a nice hard case. I've used this to take it to the office. Nice and convenient. I love a keyboard that will come in a hard case versus a keyboard that'll come just in a very fancy cardboard box, because the cardboard box will end up in the trash. This will get use for many, many years. The padding is good. The foam is correctly cut. It fits the board perfectly. Super nice. You've got a big old pocket here, which I assume is where your PCBs and plates will come in. And after you do the build, you can put your reed in there. Lovely. Lovely, lovely. So yeah, I mean, that's it. That's the entirety of the unboxing experience. Hard case. That's all you need to know. We'll take it out, and we will do a little tour of the externals. Now, it might be kind of hard to see how nice of a purple this purple really is, but bear with me, okay? Bear with me. I'm wearing my gloves because I may have touched this a little too aggressively, and those of you that are familiar with my incredibly cursed hands, yeah, you probably know why. We'll get to that. But first things first, let's take a look at the anodization. See how it looks. Up close on the macro cam. Check that out. It's got this nice purple. So this is, hello. This is a seamless case design. So all the way down, no seam, just some nice purple. Look at that. It's a very, very nice, very consistent anodization across the entirety of the board. And I was shocked to hear that this was not made in the factory that I expected it to be made in, because the anodization quality of this is like on par with like Singa, basically. But it turns out this is made elsewhere, which is quite cool. While we're here on the macro cam, we can see that the edges are smoothed out a little bit with a little fillet. I like to call it a fillet just to mess with people, so we're going to say fillet. It's got a nice fillet here and here and here. Okay, nice little tight fillet. Look at that. Okay. Kind of looks like a chamfer right here, but that is a fillet. The purple is very nice. It does not handle fingerprints super well, which is why I'm wearing the gloves. Okay. So, quite simple. We see here we have the wing key version. It also comes in wing keyless. I wish that this unit was wing keyless. I'm more of a wing keyless enjoyer, even on a 60%. I just unbound these when I used it, just to keep it nice and simple. We can see that the top and bottom have a little bit of forehead and lip. The top and bottom bezels are a little bit thick because this is gasket mounted. And we'll take a look at the gasket mount structure. But the gasket mount leaf spring mounting actually allows for a wild amount of bounce, like an obscene amount of bounce, and I love it. It's amazing. So yeah, the sides look like 5mm, maybe a little bit more if we include the internal and external fillets or filet o fish. Nice and simple. Again, seamless, so the entire front is one single piece of aluminum. That's aluminium to you non-Americans. Here it is on the side, again, single piece. If you see any smudges or anything like that, I assure you it's not ano consistency, it's just my hands have touched it. And I've tried my best to clean this, but if you have incredibly sweaty hands, just don't touch it. Just don't touch it. All right, on the back here, again, single piece with a little bottom cutout, which is actually part of the bottom. So this is the only place where the top and the bottom reach each other. And if we look at the matching of the ano between the top and bottom, it's not fantastic, but like if you're not directly staring at it, it looks fine. This is the only place where you will see the bottom and the top anodization at the same time. And realistically, it's on the back of the board, a location that you'll never see. Here we have the JLabs logo engraved. I am a fan of engraving. It's a nice, subtle way to add your branding without going overboard. Obviously, just don't do it on the top, do it on the back. Very nice. Our USB cutout is incredibly recessed, and this does use a daughter board. Now, for my relatively thick connectors, like, let's grab a relatively thick connector. Yeah, that's relatively thick. For my relatively thick connectors, it gets in there, no problem. But I imagine that if you're using a Yarbo connector or something else of the sort, you might struggle a little bit and may have to use a different connector. It is decently recessed. It's recessed like 0.9mm or 0.8mm. 8mm or 9mm. So like nearly a centimeter of depth in there. You can really get in there. Which, considering this uses a daughter board, it's entirely possible for this to have come out more. But again, we're dealing with a in-stock board that's going to be very cheap for what you're actually going to get. Therefore, a lot of my complaints are kind of irrelevant. I'm still going to complain about them, but again, we have to consider $280 in stock with a hard case. So, yep, so that's all four sides. We can see that it is a very simple wedge shape because, again, it is seamless and it is a 6-degree angle. So by default, it's going to be a wedge. And then the bottom right here slots into the top or the other way around. So here we are on the bottom. You can see I have touched this brass a couple times. Now, there is some sort of protection on this brass. It's just my hands are very special. And if I remember, I will show you a picture on screen now of the damage that my hands can do to a ceramic protected weight. Okay? Remember, future Simon. Okay. So here on the bottom, we see that we have 8 screws for case assembly, an additional 4 screws for the weight assembly, and the weight is purely external. It's not a through weight. The thickness of this weight, I've tried to unscrew these screws, but I don't want to damage the dude's board. But I assume it's relatively thin. It's probably 1.5 millimeters at the thickest. And here we've got a nice, cute little circle. Look at that. That's a cute little circle. You can also see my fingerprint. Yep, please don't dox me. This is my thumbprint that I placed my thumb on this weight the day that I got it. And it's probably going to be there forever because I have special hands. So yep, feet are right here. These look like 8 or 9 millimeter standard bump-ons. Perfectly fine. The board sits relatively low. Again, it is a 19 mil effective front height. So that's the height at the first keycap. And it's actually pretty comfortable to use. I personally like low angle and low front height boards. I find them a lot more convenient to use. And while using this, I wasn't having that bad of a time. I'm not a big 60% user, so for me, 60% usability really, really hurts my brain. But I was able to use this and enjoy it because it was so bouncy. There's just a little bit of bounce in there. So yeah, what we'll do is open it up, check out the internals, talk about all of that, and yeah, I'll see you there. All right, so I have removed all of the screws. I know, they're still there, but the top is off the bottom now. What I'm gonna do is just flip it over, and we can check out these screws. All right, we got them all out except for one. Let's get that last one out real quick. Perfect. And let us have a look at the screws as is customary. Now, you will notice that there are two lengths of screws, which is lovely. So these are the screws for the back of the board, and these are the screws for the front of the board. It allows you to have the same screw size. And I mean, generally for a seamless design board, you will have all the screws at the same level anyway, so this isn't anything huge. It is theoretically possible that it would have been possible to do this with just one screw length, but hey, it's nice. I don't mind as long as it's visually easy to figure out which screws go where, and logically, you know, big screws go in the back. Let's look a little bit more closely here. Let's have a look. Let's grab one of the long ones right here. See how we feel about this. There we go. Oh yeah. Nice hex head. There's no knurling around the outside of the screw, but again, knurling accomplishes nothing for a keyboard realistically. We can see that for the long screws, the threads do not make up the entirety of the screw. It's the first bit, and then the rest is just flat. And if we look at the shorter screw, we can see that the shorter screw is all thread. Check that out, all thread. Same head, same everything, same size bit. But yeah, they're decently nice and shiny. You know, the finishing on the screws is quite good. You know, you love to see it. The threads themselves look decently clean. Not the cleanest I've seen. You can see a little bit of black gunk down there between the threads, and generally I use that as an indication of like how well the threads were cleaned at the factory and during the QC phase. But again, this is fine. Normally what I'm looking for is like a lot of black gunk on the tip or near the tip, but in this case, screws look pretty good. If I were to rate these screws out of 10, these are a solid maybe 8 out of 10 screw. I mean, if they were gold and flashy and had knurling, maybe 10 out of 10. But the finishing is good, they look good, there's no corrosion. Nice little screws right there. Nice little screws right there. All right, now for the case, I'm gonna have to be somewhat careful in disassembling it because again, this does have a daughter board. So let's do this. Take the top off. Very nice. Let's flip it. And let's pull the plate out. Okay, there we go. Lovely. Okay, we can see that that JST is just barely long enough for me to... Okay, can you stop? My home assistant is telling me to do laundry. I'm doing a video. not laundry. All right, let's get this JST out. There we go, perfect. All right, we'll take a look at the case internals before we take a look at the mounting structure, but you can see that it is gasket mounted, and you can see that there is a little bit of a leaf spring. I know that the terminology of leaf spring kind of upsets some people. Yeah. Generally, anything can be a leaf spring, but my measure of whether or not something is a leaf spring is determined by how much bounce I can get out of it. You know, if there is no springiness to the spring, which there's definitely springiness to the spring, then I do not consider it a leaf spring. In the same way that a super, super hard gasket that is essentially a solid material, for me, would not be a gasket mount, it would just be a sandwich mount. Anyway, let's have a look at the top first, as we usually do. Here we are. Now we can see there are 6 dedicated gasket landing pads here. Boom, 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 boom. And I did receive extra gaskets, which is good. Because sometimes, you know, you put it on a little bit crooked, you mess it up, you try and go at it with the tweezers, you might rip it, something like that. But it comes with extra gaskets. And if we look very, very closely, we can see that the gaskets themselves are a little bit shorter than the landing area, which is good. That is good to see, because gaskets will stretch. They'll stretch when it's hot, they'll stretch from you putting them on and back off and stuff like that. So, cool. 6 dedicated gasket landing pads. They're all of equivalent size, and they are everywhere. A lot of you might naturally say, oh, but Simon, there's a gasket mount under the spacebar. That doesn't count. For a top or bottom mount or sandwich mount as well, I guess. Sure, having a mounting area under the spacebar will greatly affect the typing feel, but with a gasket, the whole point is the entirety of the plate is meant to bounce up and down. So, no negative effects. Here we can see the weird shape that we talked about. So this is the top piece. The bottom piece essentially fills in this gap right here. And thickness of this is pretty thin. This is like 0.4 centimeters. Maybe a little bit thicker. Generally, something this thin on a large enough keyboard might sound pingy, but this does not. Because again, smaller keyboard, you don't have to go as thick on your case walls. Again, I'm just eyeballing this. My calipers are broken. So, all right, let's have a look at the screw taps. So we can see screw taps here, 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 and here. And we can also see alignment pillars. That right there is an alignment pillar. And there's also one on the opposite side. This is to align the top and bottom as to make it easier to screw it in properly. So right there. And then again, at the far side. From what I can see, there are no hook marks from the screw taps, and the screw taps themselves look pretty darn clean. Pretty darn clean. That one's got a little bit of sussiness going on around it, but otherwise, very clean. And if we do zoom out, we can understand how the assembly structure works, where the bottom has these little pins, and otherwise will sit completely flush around the lip of the top right here. Obviously, in between sits the plate, and that is sandwiched by these gaskets. Now, the gasket itself, in terms of its gasketiness, is a very gaskety gasket. That is the scientific term. No, but this is probably 30A, maybe 45A in terms of its hardness. It's compared to something like the Angle, which uses literally foam gaskets. These are actual like rubber gaskets. I personally prefer rubber over foam. Rubber is going to last a lot longer than foam is. Foam will decompose with humidity and everything like that. So these are relatively nice. And that's it. That's all we got on the top. Let's take a look at the bottom where all the action is going on. All right. So there's a few things of interest here. First of all, the JST cable channel is incredibly small. This is kind of a good thing. If you go too wide of a cable channel, you start to affect acoustics, and then you have to implement something to shield it so the reflections of the sound from the top don't get trapped in the channel and sound weird. But if you're dealing with a thin enough JST channel like this, totally fine. I noticed no audible discrepancies when typing around this area of the keyboard. And this has no foam, no PE foam, no memes, no pour-on, none of that nonsense. This is just a classic, clean gasket mount, 60%. The internal bottom is completely flat except for the very edges. And I will show you on the macro cam what I'm talking about. So very similar to the Frog, this is a way of having a very low front height, but also making it machinable. Because if this angle were to go all the way down without these little two ridges, then you could end up with a really, really, really thin piece of aluminum on the bottom. And that is more likely to warp, break, bend, stuff like that. But otherwise, besides these two little steps here on the bottom, there's pretty much nothing going on except for the JST cable channel. And the JST is clean. We can see that the footprint for the daughter board is AI03's unified daughter board design. Fairly simple, very good, easy to source. The JST looks like a custom length, but I'm not sure. Let's try and eyeball if this is somewhat custom. This is about 3.5 inches, which would be 10 centimeters. Okay, it's probably a standard length, actually. Okay. All right. Again, here on the bottom, we've got our alignment pins. These align the top to the bottom. They do a good job of doing so. The case walls here are decently thick, especially considering we're only dealing with 4 or 5 millimeters of side bezels when the case is assembled. So totally fine. We've got our gasket landing pads here. Some of my gaskets are slightly bent and crooked because I am not good at surgical things. But otherwise, very, very simple. And of course, this is not part of the internals, but we do have a weight on the bottom. And this, as a 60%, is actually decently heavy. I think this sits at 1.35 kilos built, which is on par with some of my 65s that have a weight on them. So this does not necessarily need an internal weight. My initial thoughts when I opened this up was, oh, it has no internal weight. It's probably not going to sound great. And I was wrong. You guys will hear when it comes to the typing test, but overall, nice sounding board. I think that's it for the case. There's not much else going on. There's this bit right here where the top and bottom overlap, and then this little bit comes out. Essentially, this is just a little bit of extra machining, but it does give it a little bit of style. If we were trying to keep the price point a little bit lower, then this probably wouldn't be here, and this would just be a completely flat piece. But again, it's nice to see. And I love that I'm wearing gloves, and yet I'm still leaving fingerprints on this. Okay. So that is the top and bottom. And now let's move on to the actual internals, which is the plate and PCB. All right, here is our plate PCB combo. What we've got in here are some Gateron X round 2. This was originally built with ergo clears, and it felt and sounded terrible in my opinion, and we rebuilt it. This is an FR4 full plate, and as FR4 plates go, it's a fairly standard plate. It's got ISO layout support. The most interesting thing that's actually going on with this plate is the mounting tab. So this large area here is where the gasket hits and then allows it to leave spring. I'll show you on the macro cam because the movement is very subtle, but when you're typing, it's very noticeable. So here we are. We've got about that much movement, and I'm not putting much pressure because I don't want to break this, but this does move quite well. And this does, again, in my definition, qualify as a good implementation of a gasket leaf spring design. So full FR4 plate. Also keep in mind that if you buy this during the in-stock buy, you will also get a half plate. And honestly, it's already an incredibly bouncy board. And I think with the half plate, things might get a little bit too wild for a lot of people, unless you really like bounce and flex, which I do personally. So yeah, let's have a look at the bottom. I'll show you the rest of the plate, but it's just a standard FR4 plate. There's no weird meme cuts. There's no nonsense. It's relatively well done. All right, the PCB, however, that's a whole nother thing. So first things first, it's a relatively boring white PCB. You don't love to see it, but hey, whatever. Those of you that are smart may notice that there are shims. There are shims because this is a 1.2 millimeter PCB instead of a 1.6 millimeter PCB. Having a thinner PCB allows you to get a little bit more flex out of your build and is generally nice to build on. But it is not generally nice. It's generally nice to type on, but it is generally not nice to build on. So I am using standard stabilizers meant for 1.6 millimeter thick PCBs, so I have to use shims. Now, if you're going to pick up one of these, I strongly recommend you buy TX stabilizers that are meant for 1.2 millimeter PCBs, because the shims that come in here are kind of an afterthought to the PCB design. Here we could see a diode that is directly in the path of a shim, and I had to cut this out manually to get this to fit. Another example can be seen on this side, where again, I had to cut out the shim in order to put the shim on the PCB. Same thing over here. So yeah, generally from what I heard from Jeff, it was too late in the design process for him to change anything, but for any subsequent rounds, he does plan to fix the placement of the diodes so they do not interfere with shims. Some people may recommend that you put your shims on the opposite side of the PCB, and I absolutely think you should not do that. When you do that, you are essentially raising the height of your stabilizers by 0.4 millimeters, and you will feel a difference between your stabilized keys and your non-stabilized keys. So if you cannot get your hands on 1.2 millimeter stabs by TX, then simply look at your shim, look where the diode is, and then just clip it with a little pair of clippers. I was able to do all these basically first try. And yeah, they're not perfect, but the only thing that matters is that the shim catches this part here and this part here. All right. My unit was not native VIA, but then again, this is pre-production. And from what I've heard from the maker of this board, Jeff, this will have VIA L support. For those of you that don't know, VIA L is like VIA, except the PCB designer doesn't need to wait for somebody to approve it. The key map, the layout is recognized on the board natively, and you can remap it without having to upload a JSON file. Also, VIA L allows you more macro support, more QMK features like tap dance, stuff like that. Besides the diodes, or the diode placement, I did notice that the pads themselves for the PCB, let me show you a good example here. All right, right there. The pads are very small, okay? The pads are very small, those pads. You can barely see that there's a pad on there. Generally, for ease of build, you kind of want to go with slightly wider pads that cover a little bit wider of a circle, just so it's easier to adhere the solder basically onto the pad and the pin. This isn't my first rodeo. I was able to solder everything just fine first time, but with a pad this small, trying to actually get the heat onto the pad via a soldering iron can be a little bit difficult. So use a little bit of caution. Take it slow if you're going to be building this. Okay, just take it easy. Don't rush yourself, and you'll get through the build just fine. Over here, we can see a dedicated reset switch, which is fantastic. What What would make it more fantastic if it was on the top side. That way I would not need to fully disassemble the entirety of the keyboard in order to actually flash a new hex. The standard placement for that is either to the right of the caps lock, so right around here, or over here on the spacebar. However, needing to get double-sided PCB assembly does change the price, and that affects the price for the end customer that will be buying the board. So in this case, what's done is done. Hopefully, the second revision PCBs will have gold pads, wider pads, better diode placement, topside reset, and native via L pre-flashed. That's what I'd love to see, personally. But yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a big PCB guy. I'm more about aluminum cases, brass plates, the whole shebang. But when it comes to like PCB knowledge, my PCB knowledge is okay, but not great. So potentially this is totally fine for the vast majority of you. It's just little things that bother me. One of the little things that I did appreciate instead of get bothered by is that on the bottom row, Jeff was kind enough to actually tell us that that's the 6.25U placement and that's the 7U placement. That is fantastic. You love to see it. You love to see it. This way you can actually just put your switches in and you've all got them in the right spot without having to worry about it. That is very, very nice. The other keys are not labeled, but they don't need to be labeled. It's the bottom row that is most problematic for the most amount of people. And, a lot of people think, haha, that'll never happen to me, but it'll happen. It's happened to me as well, where you don't realize you put something in just slightly one pad to the right, and after you've soldered it, your caps aren't going on. So having something like this as a nice sanity check, fantastic. Controller-wise, this uses a 32U4. Let's verify that. It's an 18 mega. It's very easy to flash. Wait. Yep, it uses a 32U4. It's a great controller. I like it very much. You can flash it with Atmel Flip, which allows you to basically flash the PCB in like 3 seconds. Maybe like 5 if you have difficulty like navigating. But yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Now, I'll close it up and I'll give you a typing test. But before I do that, we're going to talk about the feel. We're going to talk about the sound. We're going to talk about my suggested build, all that good stuff. All right. So firstly, let me just get this JST in there because I know I'm going to struggle a little bit. Just like a USB cable, you put it in correctly the first time, but it feels like you put it in wrong. So you have to try 8 more times. Oh, nope, nailed it. First try. I'm a professional. All right, and let me just guide this into the cable channel just with my left hand right here as I place it down. There we go. All right, we're good. So the tolerances on this are very, very tight. Like you could see that I had to move around the plate to just get it to line up perfectly. This is good. This prevents us from getting any sort of horizontal plate motion. When I say horizontal, that means like in any direction, just in these axes, right? Kind of like the original Angle, which had a lovely gasket mount, but like I could move the plate to the right and the left if I wanted to. Here it's moving around a little bit because we have yet to actually sandwich it. Now, you guys have seen how incredibly bouncy this is in terms of typing feel. Now, this is not fully assembled, but it's easier to see this way. So here's me pressing down on the G key in the center of the keyboard. Here's me pressing the Enter key on the far right of the keyboard. Like, obviously, it's not being gasketed in fully, but I'm just trying to give you an understanding of how much movement this thing can have. And it's a lot of movement. This is bouncier than the Angle. And I love the Angle for being bouncy. This is bouncier than the Angle and does not suffer from the same defects that the Chinese version of the Angle, the production version was later resolved, had. So, from a typing feel perspective, I am not a 60% enjoyer. I never was a 60% enjoyer. This is my favorite 60% that I have typed on to date. And I've typed on an OTD Mini. I've typed on a Unicorn. I've typed on various duck boards. typed on a key code. I mean, I'm just throwing that in. It's not known for being a good feeling board. Anyway, this is, for me, a fantastic 60% because of how crazy bouncy it is. I just like the bounce. I like the typing feel of bounce because the idea behind bounce is as you press down on a key, it comes back at you and helps it return faster. It makes the typing feel more responsive. It makes it feel like you can go faster than you traditionally would be able to. If you guys remember from my Geonworks F1 review, this is exactly what I was talking about. This is far, far bouncier than an F1, like concerningly so. So if you're somebody that likes a more stiff typing feel, this is not for you. This is absolutely not for you. If you're somebody that likes flex instead of bounce, maybe try the half plate, but it's a gamble because I don't have a half plate here and I wasn't able to test it. I assume that with a 1.2 millimeter PCB and a half plate, you get a little bit of flex out of it, but the name of the game for this board is the bounce more than anything else. Now, from an assembly standpoint, before we get into typing sound and before we get into switch recommendations, from an assembly standpoint, I've assembled a lot of gasket mount boards, and this has been one of the easier ones to assemble. It's just simple. It's just simple. It's incredibly hard to screw this up, unlike other boards that I've built recently, like the Sandglass, which I'm pretty sure I assembled wrong like 4 or 5 times before actually getting at it. Then again, the Sandglass is a far more complex beast, but still, in terms of gasket mount boards, even compared to gummy O-ring, like ledge O-ring mount, this was still a breeze to assemble. And it's nice. I've honestly really enjoyed this. Now, again, reminder, this is not my keyboard. This was not sent to me to keep. I don't get to keep this. This goes back to its owner. I get nothing out of, saying this is good if it's not good. But I enjoyed this very much so. It's been a very, very enjoyable typing experience for me. Now, the original build was with some JLabs, I think, or C3 stabs, some random stabs that were not Sherry. And it sounded and felt really bad. And I was confused. And at that point, I kind of figured it out then and there that the build just didn't fit. Because we went with ergo clears and we went with kind of, some relatively suspicious stabilizers. So I told Jeff, hey, listen, let's rebuild this correctly, because he sent me his switches, the ergo clears for me to do it. And it was not the best fit. But we grabbed some Gateron X, the latest round. They feel and sound identical to the first round, so the only difference is the color. These are beige. Previously, they looked like Gateron yellows. So we built it with some Gat X Milky Top, and unlubed sounds and feels really good. And we just threw in some standard Cherry clip-in stabilizers. You can literally never go wrong with standard Cherry clip-in stabilizers. They're cheap, they're good, they work every time, unlike far more expensive stabilizer options. So for this, I would recommend going with something Milky Top, potentially. They don't have to be Gateron X. You can just grab some Gateron yellow Milky Tops, Gateron red Milky Tops, make your own Nixies, basically. So throw a Milky Top on a Cherry switch and go with maybe a nice 203 grade 0 or a 204. I think 205 for something like this might make it sound too deep, because this I know you guys aren't hearing this and you'll hear it during the typing test, but with unlubed Gateron X, this basically already sounds like a board that has been lubed with maybe 204 grade 0. So it's a relatively deep sounding board. And when I said earlier that this really doesn't need an internal brass weight, that's what I'm talking about. Because generally the internal brass weight will sit underneath the alphas to help just deepen the sound a little bit, but this doesn't need it. It gets a lot of help from being built with an FR4 plate. Now, FR4 plates, which are the only option, I believe. Let me check. Yes. Unless my notes are incorrect. But yes, it comes with 2 FR4 plates. Maybe aftermarket, you'll be able to get something else, but with the FR4 plate, it sounds decently deep. So it's a Western sound more than anything else, and it's a Western feel more than anything else. It's very bouncy. It's a very fun typing experience. If you're trying to build it with something that's not Milky Tops, I would just recommend not going with super high pitch switches. So don't put JWKs in this or JWICs. Anything that has a very loud return sound isn't going to be great. I preferred this with PBT over ABS because it helped thicken up the sound a little bit more. With ABS, it wasn't fantastic sounding. There are some boards that shine with ABS keycaps, and there are some boards that shine with PBT keycaps. This is the latter. Something, for example, like a Matrix 2.0, you got to put ABS on that. Something like this, you've got to put PBT on it. And if you don't have the means to shell out, $80 or whatever it is for a CRP set, consider a Shenpo set from Taobao for about $28. That was the set that was originally on this. It felt great. It sounded great. I just replaced it with this because this looks a little bit better. I mean, in the end, you're paying for the superior die sub, essentially. But yeah, that's my general sound and feel thoughts about this. Just build it slowly so you don't mess up the PCB. Go with a somewhat deep sounding switch, and definitely go PBT on it. Definitely go PBT. Originally, this was built with tactiles, but I went to linears. I'm personally a linear enjoyer more than an MX tactile enjoyer. But if you like tactile switches, go for it. Just make sure they're decently deep sounding so it helps like really tie the board together. I think that's my main suggestion there. So yeah, let me see if I missed anything. No, pretty much good. Pretty much good. I've gone through, all the notes. Those of you that don't know, I spend weeks with a board, which is why my review videos are not, super often and why they take so long. I will, on average, spend 4 to 5 weeks with a keyboard, typing on it daily to get my thoughts together. And a lot of people will think that is, massive overkill, but to really, really pick up the very subtle things, it does need time, because every keyboard is going to feel and sound like a keyboard initially. But as you put, more effort into it, more time into it, you start to pick up the little things like, how comfortable the typing experience is. How long did it take you to adjust to it? Is it fatiguing on the fingers, for example, compared to the same switches in another keyboard? Have you had any weird issues, cable disconnect, stuff like that? But no, this has been a fantastic 60%. And this is one of those very rare scenarios in which I actually review a keyboard before you're able to purchase it. So if you're in the market for a good 60% that is bouncy, okay, that is the requirement here. If you want a super bouncy and also good 60%, go for this 100%. For the price point, it's great. It's $278. You get a super nice case with it. You get 2 plates. The PCB isn't the best, but it doesn't matter. It's going to do the job of a PCB anyway, so who cares? Anyway, we're going to go into a typing test, after which I will give you my summary. Even though I just gave you a little mini summary, I'm going to give you more summary. Hello. I hope you enjoyed the typing test. In terms of the overall value proposition of this board, I think it's fantastic, especially considering the fact that this is going to be in stock for sale real soon for you guys to actually buy and get immediately. I'll start from the externals and work my way in. Externally, this is the most gorgeous purple anodization. It's very rare that you'll see me wearing gloves. That's how nice the ano is. I feel bad every time I touch it. It's gorgeous, it's seamless, it's simple. If you're not a 60% enjoyer, then, I mean, you're watching this anyways, but hello. I'm not a 60% enjoyer, and I really, really enjoyed typing on this a lot. The mounting is unique to some degree. I mean, we've seen similar mounting in like the Angle, in the F1, but thus far, this is the bounciest of the bunch. And if you love a big bouncy 60%, then oof, absolutely go for this. The PCB game on this is mid-tier. It's not doing anything amazing. I've seen better PCBs, but again, it's doing the job. It works. I was told that for later rounds, the PCBs will be improved. So, I mean, go for it now, because you're not going to notice the improved PCB anyway. It's just during building, your building will be ever so slightly easier. But if you're willing to put the effort in and put a nice build on this, I am certain that this is a keyboard that you can actually really enjoy. And I said this during the video, but I'll say it again. This is my favorite 60% to type on of all time. That's my preference, okay? You have to understand that's opinion. I like bouncy boards. I like flexi boards. I don't like stiff boards. I don't like high-pitched sounding boards unless like it's trying to do something special. This is great. Like if this was a TKL, this would be my daily, basically. But it's a 60%, and I'm not a big 60% user personally. Great board. The dude that put it together, Jeff, has offered a fair price. He's been very open-minded to, all my notes, all my criticisms, all of that, and intends to continue to make the board a better product, which is amazing to see. I love a designer that will come to me and be like, hey, Simon, review my board, not showcase my board, okay? Because most keyboard reviews you guys are watching are not reviews, they're showcases. It's very rare when people will come to me and tell me, Simon, review my board. It implies either they're incredibly confident or they're incredibly stupid. But in this case, this has been a very, very nice 60%. In terms of my own personal typing experience, like I said, this is the best 60% I've typed on. In terms of finishing, the anodization is on par with Singa anodization. Now, I've only seen this one unit, so your unit may differ, but this purple is fantastic. The weight finishing is not great. You guys can see my fingerprints right there and over there. But, just don't touch your weights. Brass is going to brass. Plates are good. Plates feel good. Plates sound good. As a whole package, I like it. I recommend, if you are in the market, you buy this. And if you're not in the market, well, thank you for watching this far into my video. I guess that's it. I would very much like to thank all the people, by the way, that support me on Patreon, because YouTube review videos for me take 4 to 5 weeks and on average get me like $5. Which is kind of painful. But a lot of people are supporting me on Patreon now. Thank you, all of you, for supporting me on Patreon. It gives me, 1, the ability to help fund these, and 2, it gives me the motivation to actually sit down, put the effort in, and properly review a keyboard. And it opens up the doors to, me being able to pay for shipping back and forth when required, which is fantastic. So thank you for your support. Even if you're not a patron, the simple fact that you watch my YouTube videos is something I appreciate very much, and it means a lot to me. So I guess that's it. I'll see you guys on the next review, which will be a while from now.